Hello, hello.
I'm Savannah.
And I'm Elysia.
And this is Burden of Proof.
Welcome back. Welcome, new listeners.
Yes. Hello to our newbies and welcome back to all of those who listened last week. Again, great job with Ariel Castro, Elysia.
Thank you. My apologies for the mini series.
The 2
all
hours.
in one.
It's okay. Well, it's funny because our listeners don't like when we, not that they don't like, but they prefer when we do one
Single
episode
episodes.
versus 2 parts.
Yeah, they just always seem, and in case you're listening and you're like, what are you talking about? I don't care if you do it in 2. We did take a small poll on social media like early on. And also we notice our numbers. Like our numbers kind of drop off on 2-parter episodes.
Yeah.
For some reason. So yeah, I just didn't expect that to be as long as it was. I kind of misjudged based on my notes.
Yeah.
And, for anybody that was like, holy crap, this is way too long, I'm sorry.
That's not
for
how
those
long
of you,
they normally are.
Yeah, for those of you who listened and loved it, thank you.
Yeah. So we'll be in for a normal length episode today, theoretically. I will say it is longer than my cases normally are.
Yeah, so it's probably like my shorter cases.
Yeah, it's probably like an Elysia short case. Because normally like my notes are like 8 to 10 pages and this is like 10 and a half, almost 11 or 12.
Oh, yeah. That'll be fine.
It's longer for me, but it's fine.
Cool.
Let's jump into it. So this case is our Patreon selected case for the month of August.
Woo, woo. Thank
Clap,
you,
clap,
Patreons.
clap. Thank you so much, Patreon. Patrons. I always love doing cases like this because it's just a direct way for our listeners to tell us exactly what they want, what kind of cases they want. And if you want to do that, you can always join our Patreon to vote in the polls. And if you don't want to join Patreon and you still want to participate, the way that we do our polls is we take listener suggested cases and we put 3 or 4 different cases, like very different cases, into the polls.
Mm-hmm.
And then our patrons select from those.
So yeah, if there's a case you want to hear,
you
but
definitely let us know.
You can always submit a request.
Yes. And sometimes we do listener requests that aren't Patreon chosen. Just depends on the week. So this week we are covering Emil List, Family Annihilation.
Oof.
Yes. I will say I wasn't super thrilled when this was the pick.
Okay.
But I'm going to say you guys were right. I was wrong.
Wow.
It's actually way more up my like little niche alley than I thought.
Okay.
So I started thinking about how like I tend to cover, especially early days, was a lot of like teen killers, and they tend to kill people that they're really close to or their family.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's actually a lot of similarities, and I enjoyed doing the research on this, and I didn't think I would. So you guys were right. It'll be a good time. I mean, it won't be because it's true crime, but
it will be, but won't be.
It will be, but it won't be. And I was surprised pleasantly. So I'm excited. I'm actually really excited to talk about it.
I think that needs to be like once we get merch.
Yes.
It'll be a good time. Well, it won't be.
But anyway, we're still here.
But we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm excited.
Same. I don't know this case.
I did because my fiance, this is one of the cases that he did a lot of research on it a couple years ago. He fell down a rabbit hole about it. And so I've heard about it from him before.
Okay.
But it's been a couple years and I'm glad that I looked into it. This was good.
All right. Let's go.
Let us begin. So John was born to Frederick and Emil List, and he was raised a strict Lutheran. I'm not going to lie to you. His parents were first cousins.
So we're off to a great start.
To a fantastic start.
Okay.
His father, Frederick, really never bonded with him, and he was kind of raised at an arm's length from his dad his whole life. But he did ingrain with him his core values. Christianity, being the traditional man of the house, working really hard through American capitalism for success, all of which he devoted to the Lord. And somehow he taught John that his value really did come down to what he could bring financially to his family. And he ended up feeling that poor people didn't work hard enough, and there was no excuse for that.
Sorry, that one was really gross, but that's how I feel about it. I would just like to say that that's bullshit.
It's stupid.
And I hate it. And I don't understand why people believe that.
I don't either, man. I don't either. But John was continuously treated as an afterthought throughout his childhood by his father. In fact, his dad turned the upper floor of their home into a rentable apartment and forced John to sleep downstairs in the lounge, basically keeping him from ever having privacy or a room of his own, because it just wasn't necessary, he thought. He did have a closer relationship with his mother, though, and he would, by default, listen to all authority figures without question, and he valued his mother's opinion above all. Some people think that he was too close to Mommy Dearest.
Oh, no.
But it wasn't like that, in my opinion. Like, honestly, I think that it doesn't necessarily matter, because his relationship with his mom doesn't really have a whole lot to do with it towards the end. And even in the ways that it does. I mean, it's not surprising. I mean, you know, like, I really didn't do a deep dive into my last case, Ariel Castro. Like, I didn't. But clearly he had mommy issues too. Right. Yeah. Like, to some degree anyway. Right. Yeah. So he graduated high school before he enlisted in the military, and he was stationed in a couple different areas, but he met his future wife, Helen, in Virginia. And we're going to talk about her in just a second. But before we do, I'm going to wrap up the military service. He was honorably discharged. He received a Bronze Star. A lot of people at the time did. It was the end of the Nazis. And a lot of people received that. And he did have a little bit of action there towards the end. And when he returned from the war, he and his mother decided that his next steps should be a business degree. So he goes and gets his undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor in business management. And then he goes on to get his master's degree in accounting. Okay. But in the meantime, before that, he met Helen and they got married. And so we're going to talk about Helen List for a minute, because this is a part of the story that I didn't know before. Okay. So I've always thought, oh, John List killed his whole family and they were the perfect American dream. Okay. And no, Helen List had her own set of issues. She was a major part of his decline. Gotcha. I'm not saying that he wouldn't have ended up doing things. I'm not saying that it's her fault. It's not her fault. But at the same time, this is a huge contributing factor that I just didn't know. Yeah. A toxic relationship. Right. I'm guessing. Sure. Something was toxic for sure. Oh, boy. Okay. So Helen List was an interesting woman. John was her second husband. Her first husband's name was Marvin. And he was also in the armed forces. And unfortunately, he passed away. The other unfortunate thing about Marvin is that he had syphilis that he then gave to Helen. Oh. I don't know if he had this prior to their marriage or if he stepped outside of their marriage and got syphilis and brought it home. But either way, she did get syphilis from him. And for some stupid reason, either she was denied the medication or she took it and it didn't run its course. Right. Because it's just penicillin. Yeah. But she was living with syphilis. That's bad. It's very bad. That affects your everything. Brain. Yes. So yeah. She began their marriage by lying to John about being pregnant, sort of forcing his hand to get married, and then she wasn't pregnant. And she continued to suffer long-term effects of her syphilis, but she never told her doctor or John that she had it. She suffered from serious eye issues and brain damage that would continue to get worse, and many, many, many health issues that would lead her to be hospitalized many times in the future. She was known by neighbors to leave the lights on all the time, vacuum at 3 o'clock in the morning, and had very little social skills. The worse that she got, the more that she drank, and ended up becoming a major alcoholic throughout raising their children. This was horrible for John because when she would get drunk, she would call John home from work to come change the baby's diapers or do things around the house. What? She would continue to embarrass him at any sort of work function, getting drunk and telling people that he never measured up to her first husband. Your first husband who gave you syphilis? And died. Yes. Really, Helen? Yes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about the List family. They ended up having 3 children within their marriage. She had a daughter from her first marriage, so he did have a stepdaughter named Brenda. You said within their marriage, and I was like, wait, hold on. Oh, yes.
But it's
It was
because she
of her
had a
previous
previous
marriage.
kid.
Yes.
Okay.
She did have an older daughter. But they went on to have Patricia, who I believe went by Patty. I call her Patty throughout the whole thing. Frederick, and then John Jr. And so Brenda was very quick to get married and leave the house when she turned 18. For lots of reasons.
Yeah.
Right after Brenda left the house, John took a job with Xerox, and it was a pretty good job working in their accounting department, and they moved to New York, Rochester area for this job. They were living an upper middle class lifestyle, and he made pretty good money, and as a result, Helen always wanted the best or newest item of clothing. She ramped up her drinking, and her brain damage, unbeknownst to John, was getting worse. They continued to make ends meet, despite living right along the edge of their means.
So, question.
Yes.
They have all these kids.
We're in the 60s.
He never got syphilis? Was it like treated enough that she was no longer spreading it?
Fair question.
We don't know.
I don't know the answer.
Okay. Well, okay.
I don't know how syphilis works. I don't know if she isn't contagious after a while. I don't know how it works.
Right. You had said that you weren't sure if she had treatment and the treatment just didn't fully work, or
yes, I've seen
she
it.
Didn't. I don't know all the full things,
yeah.
and it's been a while. My medical assistant certification expired over a decade ago.
Yeah.
So I don't remember the details about it. And obviously in the early 2000s, when I was a medical assistant in gynecology, syphilis was not something we regularly saw or dealt with. But being that penicillin is the treatment, I could see how maybe it wouldn't knock it out of your system completely, but
I don't know.
You weren't spreading it.
I've seen it in different sources say different things. I've seen where she was denied the medication due to her being a woman. I've also seen that she took parts of it, or that she took it and it didn't fully work. I've seen both, so I don't want to say one way or the other.
But yeah, I just wondered, wouldn't he have gotten it? And then he's a mess too. And yeah,
he did not have syphilis, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
As far as I know, but they were doing okay. So John reached the position of director of accounting within Xerox, and he was all but told by supervisors that he'd basically hit his growth point there. So it's unclear if he was laid off from Xerox or if he ended up looking for another job. I'm pretty sure that he just started looking for another job. That's kind of the impression that I get. And he ended up accepting a job at a bank, a New Jersey City bank, as their vice president. So they moved to Jersey, and Helen continued to demand that their lifestyle and their status improve. So when they moved, they started looking at houses in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. But they ended up buying a nearly $60,000 home. It was a Victorian-style mansion with 19 rooms, fireplaces, and a Tiffany skylight. People
I was going to say 60,000 back then.
is a lot.
Was a lot.
People always mention the Tiffany skylight. I don't know if it was authenticated or what, but people always mention that. Apparently that's a big deal.
Well, I mean, yeah, it kind of was.
Yeah. So despite the house being nearly twice what they had budgeted, this is what Helen wanted and what she demanded, and it was a pillar of John's belief system to provide for his family and his wife's wants and needs.
You're not working hard enough, John.
Literally, that's my next line. Because of his beliefs, he felt that if his family wanted or needed more, he needed to work harder to accommodate that. In order to afford this house, he asked his mom for the money for a loan for the down payment, and she said, "Sure, but I'm going to move in with you. If I'm going to give you that money, I'm going to move in with you."
You're living in a mansion.
Yeah, her husband had passed away. She had some savings put aside, so she moved to Jersey with the family. They settle in. He becomes the treasurer at his church, but Helen no longer attends services. She'd never been as devout in her faith as he was, but for John, this was incredibly embarrassing. Being such a pillar of the church and then not having his family or his wife by his side was really embarrassing for him. He also was upset with the fact that he could not take her to work functions because she was an alcoholic and she was not.
Yeah.
She was insufferable. So he couldn't take her anywhere. She was crazy at home because she is literally what we'll find. Her brain is shrinking.
Yes.
So she has tertiary syphilis, which is long-term syphilis.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't doing great. But the problem is John never says anything. He never communicates. He never says we're spending too much money. Anyway.
You're acting crazy.
Yes. And so his children had started to pull away from the church as well. He also starts seeing other issues with his children, particularly with Patricia. Remember me saying that Brenda had moved out and gotten married really quickly?
Mm-hmm.
She ended up having 2 failed marriages before she finally found Mr. Right, and she ended up being pretty happy in her 3rd marriage. But John was determined that Patty would not end up this way. He was like, I see the signs, you're not doing that. And he had other reasons that he was worried, because she was a theater kid. Which is, of course, the devil. The
You're not going to become one of them whore actresses.
They're the devil.
I'm sorry. Where they live in New Jersey, not the deep south.
It's also like the mid to late 60s. So they don't have transatlantic accents, but
yeah.
He also disagreed with some of the clothes that she wore. And so some of her more rebellious make love not war shirts were a no-no from John. But for the record, she was just a normal kid. She was a normal teenager. She was deeply involved in her theater group, and her middle brother had jobs. So, like, bite me, Dad.
Cool.
So Helen's health problems really hit the fan, and she's hospitalized several times between 1969 and 1970. And the truth finally comes out, and John is told that her mental deterioration and her brain shrinking is from tertiary syphilis. Her brain function was slowing down significantly, according to her medical records. She struggled to walk at times. There were times when she couldn't bend her legs. She struggled with speaking occasionally, especially in doctor's offices when they would try and discuss her symptoms with her. She would completely shut down and be unable to speak. She had all sorts of medical side effects, and she was generally not well.
Yeah.
She also completely went blind in one eye. Like, there was just so many issues.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I've heard. I've heard.
She had
I've heard
some
it's terrible
vision problems before they got married. This is horrible. She's pretty wall-eyed. It's really significant. So, their medical bills were astronomical, and he had actually taken a pay cut when he left Xerox and bought the giant house. But it was a vice president position. It was supposed to be better and lead to better things, and he had outgrown Xerox, so that was kind of why the choice was made. But trying to keep up with Helen's materialistic wants, raising 3 children, and the medical bills, this was just a huge added stressor.
Yeah.
And don't even try and suggest that they could try and get welfare to help them pay for the medical bills. You're not supposed to accept government assistance. That's a sin.
Only poor, lazy people.
Evil people who are going to hell for being poor. In case it's not obvious, that's sarcasm. But yeah, healthcare workers suggested to John that maybe they should try and apply for welfare because their medical bills were insane and they don't even know their financial situation. But they said, look, this is a lot and the government can assist if you just apply. And he looked at them like they were...
How dare you?
Yes, exactly.
Insult me with such things.
Right. But maybe he should have thought differently. Because, unfortunately, John is laid off from his job because the bank closes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 1971, and he is now jobless.
You're not working hard enough, John.
You're not working hard enough, John. No, it just happens.
It does.
So he doesn't know how to face this. And they're living in a house that eventually it's been triple mortgaged.
Oh my God.
Just trying to make ends meet. He has a wife who is constantly spending money, medical bills, and no job. He chooses not to tell his family that he was laid off and begins taking the train every morning like normal in a suit and tie, running it down a few stops, and spending hours in the train station either reading or hunting for jobs. He tries insurance, sales, and tries consulting and to start his own company, and nothing sticks. So he begins borrowing money or redirecting money from his mother's accounts to pay the bills and to keep the lights on and the mortgage paid, because he had been added to all of his mother's accounts when she moved in. She's getting older. Yeah. Pretty standard, material.
Yep.
Now, the account started with about $50,000 in it, so it wasn't technically stealing because his name was on it, but it's pretty icky, so just keep that in your back pocket.
It's not illegal. It's unethical.
Right. John is spending lots of time alone in train stations, and he starts thinking. John fully believes that his family's path to heaven is on his shoulders as the leader of the house. He sees that they've pulled away from the church and sees Patty's relationship with theater, their financial ruin, and he thinks that death is a better situation than being poor. I know this isn't sound logic, but he doesn't think that his family would handle poverty very well. And the more he thought about it, he thought that the first sign of their financial reality, the children and his wife would forsake the church altogether, leading to their eternal damnation. As time passed, he solidified that the only solution was to kill them, that he would ask the Lord for forgiveness and one day be able to join them in heaven. He felt that killing them would save their souls. Oh, and not to mention that then he wouldn't have to face the reality of any of his financial mistakes or any consequences of the fact that he never communicated with his wife that they were living beyond their means and that they were out of money.
Yeah, that had nothing to do with it.
Nothing to do with it. It was
at all.
Nothing.
Nothing. Savannah, why would you even say that? He is worried about their souls.
Well, and he was. Like, that genuinely was his thought process, but, like, we'll talk later about his psychiatry and, like, the root of the problem wasn't being acknowledged here, On October 14th, 1971, John applies for a gun permit, saying that he needs a gun for home protection. Well, he was going to protect his home, all right. From the demons. I'm sorry, it's not funny.
It's not, but
anyway.
When people are just...
Okay.
So this... Okay, I'm sorry. I'm processing. I'm processing.
I know.
I'm processing.
It's a lot to process. Because he has logic. I'm not saying that it's correct. But his thought process at least has a tentative chain of events.
Yeah, I guess I'm but that. I'm trying to think of a way to explain what I'm thinking without, I really don't want to offend people.
Right.
Because it's not my intention. But being in true crime, and we have covered many cases that are connected to religious beliefs.
Yes.
And based on what I know so far,
yes,
it seems to me that much like other cases we've covered, there just seems to be a pattern of men in particular, but even women, who get so caught up in religious beliefs, but
it's not religious beliefs. It's mental health issues that latch on to the religion.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's always that little shred of doubt. Is it that he thought he was saving their souls? Or is it that you're saving face? Because you have a crazy wife that's bleeding you dry of money, but you can't possibly get divorced because that would be a sin.
Right.
And now you have theater children.
just a theater child. Just the one. The other two did literally nothing.
A theater child who's going to become a whore of an actress. And she's probably hanging out with the gays. It just, how much of it is truly you're worried about the spirituality? Not and that's not even getting into like theology and the fact that as the man of the house, you are supposed to lead them spiritually, but like ultimately it's their choice.
Right.
If you did the right thing and they just didn't follow, like that's
their relationship with religion, not yours.
So
yeah, it's and when we talk about later, I'll just tell you now, he is diagnosed with OCD by psychiatrists later on, which
that explains so much.
You're making us look real bad, buddy. But like
I am surrounded by people with OCD.
It does make it make a little bit more sense because he just gets obsessed with like finding a solution to the problem, which also keeps his face up, you know, like honestly, his solution does accomplish all of his goals. It's just wrong. Like, you know what I'm saying? So to him, when he's not thinking logically, I'm sorry, I can't justify it. I'm
tapped out. Like, that doesn't justify it, but I do with that little tidbit, I do understand the obsession or compulsion that he has
also, I personally think that he was likely on the spectrum.
I mean, now they know that OCD is more of a neurodiversive thing, not a mental health illness per se.
He was very he had all these jobs and he was very successful in what he did. And he was good at his job, but he was not likable. People didn't like him. He was odd, he was quiet, and he wasn't personable. And like, so
none of those things, OCD, none of the neurodiversity, you know what I'm saying. Why can't I talk? Back then, nobody got diagnosed with that.
No, and he never was.
Very few people were. I think maybe some people were diagnosed with OCD if it was like real severe.
Right.
And we're talking textbook, like you're like repetitively doing behaviors and such. Right. But now we know it's so much broader than that. Mm-hmm. And if you're living with all of those things and you don't know what it is, you don't know why you're different, you can go into a spiral and actually not.
And it became an obsessive thought process for him that this was the only way. And so, you know, like I said, you're making us look real bad, buddy. Those of us with OCD.
Yeah. And if you're new here, we are a neurodiversive bunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we know, Savannah has shared.
I have OCD.
She has OCD. I have a husband and a child with OCD. Yes. At least one child. We suspect a second. So yeah. And
I mean, I will say I don't know many people with OCD that do this.
No. And I don't mean to imply that. I can understand how in that time frame with no sort of treatment or even an understanding. Like today,
right?
Like my child that's been I have one who we think is OCD and is not on medication, and I have one that is on medication because hers is severe enough. But like even the one who we suspect, like we're not trying to put them on medication. They have gone to counseling and learned coping mechanisms to help. And you've been through that yourself. Yep. And so like there's things in place of just being aware. Mm-hmm. And if he was autistic, same thing. Like you can learn things today that help you cope with life.
Yes.
That back then they
you never
just didn't have.
Right. And he's got all of these expectations. And also at the end of the day, he wanted to do this. And we'll talk about it a little bit when we get into the actual murders, but he wanted to do this. And so there is part of him that just was a murderer, and that's hard to grasp. You can see us trying to like logic and figure out why this is happening. Part of it you can't figure out.
I am in no way trying to condone or like make excuses. Yeah. I'm just saying like, okay, I see how we got here.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So this next little section, I'm going to be so real with you. I don't know why or the context that this happened. Okay. By the time I realized that this was even part of the story, I did not have time to read a book that was published that I think would probably have the answers. But I am going to tell you what happened so that you just have the information. But no questions, please. Hold your questions till the end.
Okay.
And at the end, I'm just going to leave. I'm just kidding. He sat his children and his family down and explained to them that one day they would die, it would be soon, and it would be at his hand. And he basically said, how do you want your remains to be handled? Do you want to be buried or do you want to be cremated? And again, I don't have the context of this conversation, but we do know that it happened, and we do know that the children obviously were freaked.
Not a serious question. What?
I know. Right.
What?
Right.
Who does that?
Right. And
that is very autistic.
It's
of
very
him.
well.
I hate to say that, but like, yeah, he's
has
just
a lot of
direct and
signs.
to the point, and yeah, he probably didn't even understand why that would be like that.
Well,
they would
and
be
I think
freaked out.
part of it was he really did want to know what their final wishes would
Yeah.
be, but they're like, we're
How about
16,
no?
13, and 15. We don't know.
We hadn't really. Sorry,
Thought about
Dad.
it.
Sorry, Dad. We hadn't really come up with our
Right.
estate plan yet.
So they all said burial, and they tried to brush it off.
Oh my god!
But Patty didn't. She was the oldest, and she ended up telling her drama coach. And so her and her drama coach had a complicated relationship that I'm not going to get into. But she did tell him. I don't think it was that. It was just weird. Anyway, she did say, my dad said that he's going to kill us. And he was like, I'm sure that he didn't actually mean he's going to kill you.
No,
like,
he literally asked how
No,
I
he
want
literally said-
my remains. to
literally
be
said
taken
that
care of.
that we're gonna die, and asked how I wanted to be. I'm sure he was just like writing the will or something. And so Patty was like, okay. And a couple days later, basically, the timeline I think was this happened before Halloween. He allows Patty to throw a Halloween party, which is shocking because he doesn't seem the type who would really want to celebrate Halloween.
Yeah,
And she had all of her drama friends over in the big ballroom of their house, and they like hosted this big event, which was really strange.
He's like, live it up before I save your soul.
Kind of weird, right? And then in early November, Patty calls her drama coach again in the evening and is begging him to come over, saying that she needed him to come. And he was like, you're 16 and I'm tired. I'm not coming over. Like, which again,
Listen, Patty.
I think that's probably the right decision. But it's like, she didn't say like, Dad's trying to kill us. She just said, I need you to come over. So he was like, no, I'm tired. I'm not coming over to your house in the evening. It's not happening. We don't know what was said that night that made her call him. But we do know that the night that phone call was made was important because John slept soundly knowing the next day he was going to save the souls of his hell-destined family. So on November 9th, 1971, John packed his children up and took them to school. And when he returned, he went back inside and grabbed his 2 handguns, which was a 9mm and a .22 revolver. And he takes them out to the car and he loads them. He walks back into the home and into the kitchen where his wife, Helen, was 46 years old and she was drinking her coffee. She turns around to speak to John and he shoots her in the head. However, he doesn't shoot her correctly the first time, and so he ends up having to shoot her 4 different times, maybe more than that, to kill her.
Oh my god.
He then went upstairs where his 84-year-old mother, Alma, was eating her breakfast or drinking her coffee of some sort. Now, she lived in a different, like,
Wing.
upstairs in a different wing of the home.
Yeah.
And she had her own kitchen, and so it was far enough away that if it had just been one shot, she probably wouldn't have heard it. But because he had to shoot her so many times, she did, and she turned around and asked, like, scared what that sound was. And she also saw John before and saw him raise the gun, and he shot his mother several times. This is what I'm saying when I mean that he quite literally did want to do this.
Yeah.
Because he almost all of the children except for one and all of the 5 victims saw him. He waited until they saw him raise the gun. They watched this happen and he saw them see the fear. Like, it.
Ugh.
Also, these crime scene photos, don't Google them unless you're ready, because I mean, you see in TV shows like people dying in the last facial expression that they had.
Oh god.
You know that happens, right? Like, that's real.
Yeah.
You can literally, first of all, I read an article, there was no warning that those pictures were in it because I wasn't going to look. I had seen a warning before. And nope, they were just there. So I did see them.
Oof.
That's true. They do just freeze in fear.
Yeah.
And I think his mom's was unfortunately the most like scared looking because she'd had a little bit of warning with the gunshots downstairs. She knew something was wrong.
Poor Alma.
Yes. So next thing he does is go to the post office to stop the family mail for a month He sends himself a letter and he calls the children's school to explain that they're going to be out for some time visiting his wife's mom in South Carolina who was sick. He then goes home and he moves Helen from the kitchen to the ballroom. He cleans up some of the blood and he lays her on a sleeping bag in the ballroom. It's like deeper into the home. And then he makes himself a sandwich. Patty calls her dad and asks to be picked up early because she said she didn't feel well. So John's kind of annoyed because that's not really the plan. Like, the plan was for her to come home. Mm-hmm. But he goes and he picks her up. And when he gets back to the house, he runs inside ahead of her.
Mm-hmm.
And when she comes in the door, she turns her head to like shut the door or put her bag down or something, and he shoots her in the back of the head. And so Patty is the only child and the only victim who does not see it
doesn't
coming.
Realize. Yeah.
Right. Which is actually kind of odd considering the fact that she was one of the only children who had direct concerns.
Yeah.
I'm sure he had concerns about his other children, but they weren't really mentioned. He was more concerned.
Theater kids.
Yes,
Savannah.
He was more concerned about the devil in the theater kid than anything else. And again, she was the oldest, the most independent, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Earlier when I mentioned the kids' ages, we have since discovered that I said them in the wrong order. The issue is that John Jr.'s middle name is Frederick. So he goes by John Frederick. And then they have a younger son named Frederick. Because his dad, John List's dad's name was Frederick. So you see where I get a little confused.
Yeah, I do.
So his younger son, Frederick.
Correct. Okay.
He, I think, worked with his sister. And so he leaves work and goes home. He leaves school and goes to where he works, finds out that his sister isn't there because she's sick, calls dad and says, hey, can you come pick me up? I want to come home because sister's at home. And he was a really sweet kid. And it's pretty much assumed that he wanted to go home and take care of his sister.
Okay.
He's 13. And John List Sr. had asked his children to get jobs to like teach them independence. But in reality, it was to help supplement their income.
Yeah.
So that they weren't asking for pocket money.
Yeah.
So that's why he and his younger, so Patty and Frederick had jobs. The middle child, John Jr., was sort of his favorite child. And he played sports. And so he didn't necessarily have a job that I could find.
Okay.
So he does go and pick up Frederick. And he is annoyed again because his plan isn't happening the way that it should. But he does the same thing that he did with Patty. He comes inside, and this time he does wait until Frederick turns around and he sees the gun, and he does shoot Frederick as well.
Why do you have to ruin my murder plans?
Yeah, he's OCD. He had a plan.
Yeah.
He had the way this was supposed to go. So his middle son, John Jr., was a little bit different. He had a soccer game, and so John Sr. watched the soccer game for a little bit and picked him up and brought him home. And when he came inside, he again came inside before his son. He went to go shoot John Jr. John Jr. saw what was happening and turned, so he got shot in the back first. And he's the child that put up the most fight. So he's 15, and his dad basically emptied both of his guns and shot him several times in the chest, face, and back. Each time he had killed one of the members of the family, he moved them deeper into the home, into the ballroom, and laid them on sleeping bags. He does this for 4 of his victims, except for his mother, who was still upstairs, and she was too heavy for him to get down the stairs. He tried, he moved her from where she was shot into the hallway and then realized, well, I can't get her down the stairs. And he wasn't just going to push her because he really did have a lot of respect for his mother, despite the way that he shot her and killed her. So immediately following the 5 murders, right? 3 kids, mom, grandma, 5. Yes. I keep thinking they're a family of 5, but then grandma.
Yeah.
Immediately after the murders, John cleaned up some of the blood and began writing letters on the stationery in his office. He wrote several, including a letter to his wife's sister and his mother-in-law explaining, hey, sorry we used you as a scapegoat. Again, I'm also sorry for their deaths. It was kind of inevitable, but I know that's going to suck. I mean, obviously he didn't say it like that, but that's the gist of what he said. But the most important letter that he writes is a very long letter to his pastor, who he says is the only person who may be able to understand.
No.
Oh, he's actually not wrong.
Are you kidding me?
His pastor goes on to say things like, I'm here for you. He's out there somewhere and he needs somebody. And like, part of me thinks, okay, was that just a ploy to get him to come forward? But at the same time, like, who knows? But I think it may have been a ploy because he then also, the same pastor hosts the funeral for the families.
Okay.
But yeah, he writes this long letter explaining all of his actions and saying, like, I had to kill them to save their souls because if I told them the truth of our reality, they would completely stray from God and they wouldn't be saved. So
I cannot roll my eyes hard enough.
Right. He then, remember me saying he mailed himself a letter?
Yes.
He opens that letter. It had been delivered. And it contained instructions and a note, instructions for whoever found the bodies to call authorities and more information as to why he committed the crimes. Along with this letter, he had mailed himself a key which could be used to unlock or lock the desk drawer that he was writing on. So here's the theories, and this is the theory that I subscribe to. I think there was more than one key to this desk drawer. He was planning on putting the letters that he wrote in the drawer and locking it and leaving. He mailed the letter to himself so that even if he left and he didn't have time to write out these instructions or his meanings or whatever, it would still get there because he did it ahead of time. And then he left the key in case he did lock things in there. Honestly, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's kind of why we think he did it this way.
Right.
He's also just a little dramatic, and I think that the drama of the whole thing had something to do with it. But that is how that went.
Okay.
Yep. He went through the home and he cut himself out of all of the pictures. So there's not a single photo of him in the house, which I know sounds crazy.
No, and now,
but it's
like, there's been a few things.
1971.
I think I have heard about this before. I just forgot. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
But
it's 1971 and he didn't have pictures from him like at work. Like his office doesn't have a picture of him.
yeah.
So by cutting himself out of all their family pictures, he's very much erasing any images of him in connection with his family. So he can just hit the road.
Wow.
And it worked.
Because nobody really knows exactly what he looks like.
Right.
I mean, like,
they
people
can
who
describe
knew him,
it, but like.
Yeah, but you don't have an actual
Right.
photo to compare.
So between the notes, he knew that authorities would know immediately that it was him. He just needed to make sure they couldn't find him. Like they would have closure. They would know how it happened. And they would know his reasoning.
Right.
But they don't have him.
This is just...
It's very thought out.
Not only that, but in the beginning, and for that purpose of like, why didn't you kill yourself too?
Right, because so he has an answer to that. You're not going to like it.
I'm sure.
But he felt that killing himself would have been a one-way ticket to hell. He wouldn't be able to go to heaven. So by continuing to live and asking for forgiveness, he would be able to be saved and go to heaven with his family.
I will never, ever understand why people believe that suicide is somehow worse than murder. Not to get into a theological
Right.
debate, but
And I don't want to get into a theological debate with this next bit either. But the first thing he did after moving all of the bodies into the ballroom and arranging them, how he arranged them, was get on his knees and pray for forgiveness. So in his head, it was like a box that he checked off. He was like, okay, prayed, done, I'm all good, we can keep going. To him, it was like the next step. You do this and it's okay, and we move on. So again, I don't know what to say about it, honestly. But after he cut himself out of all of the pictures, he turned the thermostat down really low, left all the lights on except for in the ballroom, and connected classical music, which is the only music he ever listened to, by the way. He was quite a boring person. He connected the classical music to the intercom system of the house as if it was coming from the heavens, and he hit the road. The family wouldn't be found for nearly a month later, 29 days to be exact.
oh my God.
The neighbors were used to the lights being on at weird hours because of Helen's mental health issues. and none of them thought anything of them being on constantly or the fact that it was weird.
But weren't the kids in school and stuff?
No, remember he went and he called them out. He also went to their jobs.
That's right.
He also went to their jobs and told them the same thing. He called her drama teacher and told them the same thing. He wrapped everything up in a little bow. He went to all of their coaches and he said, hey, we're going to be gone for a while. Their grandma is sick. We're going up there to take care of her. Basically, we're moving, but it's like temporary, but we're not going to be here.
Oh my God.
And he didn't have a job to quit. So nobody thought anything was weird until the neighbors noticed that the lights started to burn out one by one. In addition, even though he had tied up all of those loose ends, Patty's drama coach was like, well, he said she would be gone, but she's been gone a really long time. And like things were kind of weird towards the end. So he and another teacher decided.
And she had told me that he said he was going to kill her.
Yeah. So he and another teacher decided to go check on her. So when they arrive to the house, they see all of this weird lights on. They hear the music from outside, but nobody's supposed to be home. So they start looking around. They find an unlocked window, and they do go in the house. At the same time, a neighbor saw them breaking in and called 911.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But unfortunately, her drama teacher and the other teacher did find the bodies, which at this point had gruesomely decomposed over a month, despite the fact that it was November in New Jersey. Still, it's been a month. And
yeah,
these teachers...
November in New Jersey, you'd actually probably even have your heat on at that point.
Right, and he didn't have their heat on. He just turned the air like way down. Like it was like set really low. Chilly, it was chilly, yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, these teachers were completely traumatized by what they found.
Of course.
They like couldn't stop seeing the bodies in their heads for years after. It was horrible. But the police arrived soon after and began to process the scene. With the music playing, half the lights burned out, and the bodies and the blood still half cleaned up throughout the home, it had to have been a terrible sight.
Yeah.
Detectives read the notes that were left and obviously figured out that it was John. So they started a manhunt. They found the family car at the airport where it had been abandoned in the long-term parking lot. And this is where the trail goes completely cold. Despite all of their efforts or work, they could not locate him. And they wouldn't for another 18 years.
Oh my God.
In the meantime, obviously there was a funeral. And despite asking the children how they wanted to be handled, their bodies, he did the opposite. He just said, bury them as cheap as you can. He left no money. They said cremation and he said burial. He did the opposite.
So see, he didn't.
It was, I don't know if he just forgot or whatnot, but.
You don't have a talk like that with your,
whatever.
What a psycho. I'm sorry.
Yes. But the church actually paid for a plot in the cemetery in their area for Helen and the children. But his mother was actually going to go back to a different city where she was raised and was buried there. They had a huge funeral. There are images of of Patty's teenage friends trying to cope with this, and with the case going cold, they were taking as many measures as possible to potentially catch the killer. And so there were teams of police in plain clothes at the funeral for up to 2 miles around the event.
Wow.
In case John tried to return.
Right.
But after the funeral, the police came out and said that they understood now that this was definitely not a crime of passion, but it was finely planned. It was a fine-tuned plan. So John had traveled by train from Jersey to Michigan and then to Colorado. He settled in Denver in early 1972 and took an accounting job under the name of Robert Peter Clark, and he went by Bob Clark. This was the name of a college classmate of his who would later on go, I don't even know who that guy is. But that was people's general impression of him his entire life.
Yeah.
When people did interviews, they're like, oh my gosh, you knew John List. Let me interview you. They're like, he was so forgettable. I have no idea who you're talking about.
Yeah.
This was one of, John remembered this guy's name. He never remembered him. And I should mention, just for funsies, between Michigan and Colorado, he was working like odd jobs and staying in weird places, obviously.
Right.
And part of that was working as a line cook. And he actually was really good at it. And I don't know why he didn't stick with it, because he enjoyed it. And he felt for the first time that he actually found something he really enjoyed, was cooking. But
because that is poor people work, Savannah. And poor people
right.
don't work hard enough.
Right. I can't laugh. That's so funny. But yeah, like I said, he goes to Denver. He becomes Bob Clark. And from 1979 to 1986, he's the comptroller at a paper box manufacturer outside of Denver. He joins a Lutheran congregation, and he even ran a carpool for church members who didn't have a car. And at one religious gathering, he met a woman named Dolores, and he got remarried in 1985. I see your crazy eyes.
Shut the front door.
And you should have crazy eyes, because it doesn't go well. So they ended up moving to a house in Virginia. He continued his work as an accountant at a small accounting firm. And I just wanted to throw in this little fun fact. I don't know why I put it here, but I did, and we're going to talk about it. John List was proposed as a subject for the D.B. Cooper air piracy case. You heard about that true crime case?
Yes.
It's unsolved, so we haven't talked about it. They thought that it might have been him because he was in the right location and he had gone missing. And the description they had of both of them was very general.
Similar, general, yeah.
But no, he wasn't.
But
they
had no debunked.
Yeah, they had no direct evidence. But it was interesting to me because it was the same timeline.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, he and Dolores are working in Virginia, and he didn't learn anything from his first round of the whole marriage and financial failure thing. He and his new wife start trying to create a consulting business, and he wasn't making enough money, and so his wife would supplement their business with and their bills with her own money. She worked with an army store. And he was already starting to get frustrated with the fact that she had to contribute, which did not bode well for their future together.
Because you're not working hard enough, John. I don't know.
Working hard enough, John.
Oh, God.
We're nearing the satisfaction, ladies and gents.
Okay.
But before we do that, we have to talk about America's Most Wanted.
Oh, boy.
The legal reality show that first aired in 1988 with the purpose of bringing America's biggest fugitives to people's television screens across the country.
Yes.
And this show in 1989 aired John List's case. They hired an artist and a sculptor to create a bust, like a sculpture of him. And he was very interesting because he didn't want to use any software or anything that may have shown what he looked like. He didn't use traditional methods. He has his own, like...
Yeah, I've seen the guy, that can do it, and they're creepily good at it.
It's so creepy, and he did such a fantastic job of coming up with an aged John List that after 18 years, immediately tips started flooding in. One of these tips came from a woman who called to say that it looked similar to one of her neighbors, Robert P. Clark. She explained that he was also a regular churchgoer and worked as an accountant. Since he was living such a similar life, it was very easy to track him down, and police spoke to him spoke to his wife, who Dolores had no idea what they were talking about. They went to his accounting office and arrested him. They had been looking for him for 18 years, and less than a week and a half of the show airing.
Yep.
They caught him. He was arrested in June of 1989.
Yep. I mean, say what you will about that show, but they've caught a lot of people with that show.
I have the number because I was like, how? As of 2021, which was 3 years ago, America's Most Wanted has led to the capture of nearly 1,200 fugitives, including 17 of the FBI's top 10 most wanted list.
Yep.
That's an insane amount.
Oh.
We've covered 3 cases, at least, that I can think of off the top of my head.
I just talked about it last week, which that's not how they caught him, but they didn't have the perpetrator. They didn't know who kidnapped those girls. Right. And then the Thanksgiving case that I covered.
Thanksgiving case that you covered.
Paul Marriage.
Yes. And John List. And I think one more. I feel like there's another one because I was thinking of 3, but I wasn't thinking of the Thanksgiving one. but I can't remember now. So anyway,
Yeah.
it's effective.
Yes.
The real thing was that John was caught by his fingerprints because he had his fingerprints taken when he was in the military.
Yeah.
Under John List's name. So he would go on to, until February of 1990, continue to say that he was Bob Clark and that he was
just
never
Bob Clark.
Yes. Although when detectives would go, John, he would go, yes. They're like, okay, so you answer to the name John. Your fingerprints match John List. There's no mention of John List after 1971. However, there's also no register of a Bob Clark until 1972, and your fingerprints match.
You're just living as Bob Clark for years, and you're still answering to John.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And also, he lived the same life. Like he got the same job. He got married. He was living the exact same life that he was.
You should have stayed a line cook.
He should have stayed a line cook.
Nobody would have been looking for you behind the grill.
Nope. Nobody would have cared. It was the neighbors said, well, he is an accountant. He's a very devout churchgoer. Like, he's everything. He looks like him. And the other thing is they showed a scar that he had. I think it was behind an ear on this bust. And the person who identified him was like, yeah, I waited until I saw the scar and then I called.
Oh my God, that's so freaky.
Yeah, can you imagine?
Can you imagine
like,
seeing it and you're like, I gotta go.
You're like, I have to go call my doctor. Yeah. So, again, he continues to deny that his name is John. He still says, my name is Bob Clark. I'm an accountant from Virginia. And regardless, he goes to trial in 1990.
I just envision him like demanding, "Oh, I'm Bob Clark," and then they leave the room and come back in and are like, "So John," and he's like, "Yeah,
yes, yes." And so at trial, he eventually testified that his financial difficulties reached crisis levels when he was laid off due to the closure of the Jersey City Bank, obviously. And he explains that he was diverting money from his mother's bank accounts. And he talks about her untreated syphilis and her alcoholism and all of these things. And a court appointed psychiatrist testified that he suffered from obsessive compulsive personality disorder and that he only saw two solutions, which was, kill his family and save them, or accept welfare and doom them. And so his defense was that he was not sound of mind at the time. But on April 12th, 1990, he was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing, he denied direct responsibility, saying, quote, I feel that because of my mental state at the time, I was unaccountable for what happened. I ask all affected by this for their forgiveness, understanding, and prayer. The judge did not care. He said, quote, John Emil List is without remorse and without honor. After 18 years, 5 months, and 22 days, it is now time for the voices of Helen, Alma, Patricia, Frederick, and John F. List to rise from the grave. He imposed a sentence of 5 terms of life imprisonment to be served consecutively, which was the maximum permissible penalty.
Good.
Yeah, he tried to appeal that, but obviously they were like, no. And eventually he did express remorse, saying that he never wished that he had done what he did. And he says that he's regretted his actions and prayed for forgiveness ever since. And unfortunately, in March of 2008, John List died while incarcerated of pneumonia at 82 years old.
But he still got to live to 82.
He still lived to 82. And he got to spend 18 years as a free man. And he would later say that he spent most of those 18 years, he would only think about his dead family on the anniversary of their death.
No. I thought you were going to say, like, he thought about them every day.
No. He only thought about them on the anniversary of their death after a couple years. Like, he got used to
I really do try not to cuss too much on this podcast, but fuck you.
I know, yeah.
That's, ugh.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
He's a real icky guy. And, like, he has such wacky priorities of, like, protecting his family and providing them with the things that they need to succeed in the eyes of the Lord, but at the same time kills them. And I think that's why Nicholas was so fascinated by this case when he first started researching it a few years ago. He's like, I think that as, you know, a father and as a partner in a marriage, it's important for you to help provide all of the things that, yes, he wanted to, you know, make sure they had what they needed, and that he felt he needed to work hard to do that. But that's where everything falls off. He's like, this is where it starts to go haywire. And I gotta say, it was way more interesting than I thought it was going to be.
Like, you literally were taught, I get that, like, that's the way he grew up, that's how his father was, whatever.
Yeah.
You literally were taught this is a husband and father's one job.
Right.
But, like, you still went off the rails.
Right.
You had one job, John.
You had one job.
Meanwhile, there are line cooks out there providing what they can for their families.
Exactly.
Working really hard. But also, you know, like, showing humanity.
Right, and not murdering their kids.
And not murdering their
wife
kids
and their mom.
because they're theater kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real interesting case.
Wow. I need to go
Yeah.
shower now. That just made me feel icky.
Yeah, the house, if you're wondering about the house, it burned down. It was arsoned. But they built a house on top of it and people live there.
I mean, that's not surprising. Arson. I'm assuming when it hit,
Yeah.
as it sat empty.
Yeah,
after.
well, after the news came out, somebody burned it down, which happens a lot with crime scenes.
Yeah.
Because A, they're abandoned, and B, people think that having crime scenes is weird and they want them burned down.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah, if you like arson cases, highly recommend the Pillow Pyro miniseries. That 2-part episode was really good. Anyway, sorry, distracted.
Yeah, I liked doing that. That was an interesting case to cover.
That was a good one.
Oh,
I think we're
good job.
done.
Good job.
Thank you. If you made it all the way to the end of the episode, I know this one is a little longer than
It's not bad.
my normal cases are. But if you made it all the way to the end and you want to join us on social media and get entered in for Sunday shout outs, you can leave a little theater mask for Patty.
Yeah.
Or a soccer ball for John Jr. Or a heart for Frederick, who was so kind and caring.
Yeah.
There's no syphilis emoji.
No.
So can't leave a syphilis emoji. And I also feel like I should say I'm not at all blaming the deaths on Helen's, you know, lack of communication with her husband. That's not an excuse to kill your 3 perfectly innocent children and your mother.
If he had just, like, in a crime of passion,
Right.
killed her, I could maybe go, okay, she pushed you to such an extent, but that's not, nobody does that.
Right.
Nobody goes, oh, my wife lied to me and now has all these problems.
Yeah,
and she's an alcoholic, so I must murder my whole family.
Yeah, she was like she drank a lot, and you know, it just, I thought that the syphilis and the health issues that was context I did not have.
Yeah.
It's not super, I mean, it's known information. It's not like I had to dig around to find it, but it's like when you hear about John List, because he's like such a textbook case of family annihilation. So every time I've ever heard that term in the true crime space, it's in reference to like John List or Chris Watts or something like that.
Yeah.
They always just say that and they don't explain that was part of the problem.
Right.
And I thought it was interesting. So I wanted to make sure you had all the deets on that.
Yeah.
Well, anyway,
thank you.
You're so welcome. And we will see you next week. And next week is a very special episode. Because next week will be our 100th case.
100
that we've covered.
Yeah.
So excited.
So we have a fun little, I don't know,
It's
interesting.
it's
I'm
a
excited about
special
it.
Episode.
I don't want to give it away.
Yeah, don't. It's super fun. And we're so excited.
Yeah. So thanks for listening today.
And we will see you next week.
Till next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, guys. Find us on Instagram and TikTok at Burden of Proof Pod and email us at burdenofproofpod@gmail.com.